This is our random presentation of identity and coming of age.
I'm Lauren.
I'm Marissa.
And I'm Matthew.
Okay, so what is banning book censorship? It's the term that comes from when a book is taken off the shelf from a library, a bookstore, and a classroom for its controversial content. So we asked the librarian for y'all to see what she thought of it.
So what is, well, usually if a parent or a member of a community has a problem with a book that is on a collection in the library, they can request what we call a reconsideration of the material. And it's usually because they find the material problematic. So they can come to the principal or they can come to us and they can request the book to be removed from the shelf, but there is a procedure that they must follow.
So overall, in order for a book to be banned, a parent has to go to this board of education and try to get it removed, but it usually takes a really long process to do.
Okay, so just some history on banning books. The first book that was ever banned in U.S. history is The New English Canon by Thomas Morton, and this is in 1637, mainly because the Puritans felt offended by it, so they wanted it taken off the shelves. And this has obviously continued. There have been many more books that have been banned over the years. Some of the worst times were under Hitler's rule in Germany. Because of all the book burnings that he had to wipe out anything un-German. One of the worst times was March 10th, 1933, when there were over 40,000 books burned in one night. Thankfully, we have progressed, and there's been many less, but obviously less book burnings, also less books being banned, due to the Banned Books Week being formed in 1982 by First Amendment rights activists, basically just to spread awareness about the challenging of books and censorship of them. There's also the court case in 1982, which was Board of Education versus PICO. This was basically where there was a school that was banning books and taking them off the shelves, and a lot of the students were unhappy with this, saying that this was violating their First Amendment right. They brought it to the court and ended up appealing all the way to the Supreme Court, where they eventually won. And Justice Brennan said, local school boards may not remove books from school libraries simply because they dislike the ideas contained in the books. This was a major turning point. 1982 was where a lot of things happened where that resulted in less books being banned.
So the book that we all read was The Catcher in the Rye, and the author was J.D. Salinger. He was born in New York City, January 1st, 1919, and passed away January 27th, 2010. He is mostly known for The Catcher in the Rye and for setting a new literature course post-World War II. So the book was about a boy named Holden who was 16 years old who got kicked out of a prep school and ran away to New York City, where he drank, smoked, and met a lot of interesting people on the way just because he didn't want to go to his parents, and he learned a lot about himself and his identity.
The book was published in the year of 1951. There was a rough draft between 1945 to 1946, which is also a little article, also known as a serial form. The way this book connects to our theme of identity and coming of age is the character Holden, goes out through the book as a 16 to 17 year old, and 16 to 17 year olds, as you know, are not very aware of their surroundings. But after the book becomes more and more mature and becoming more of a man.
So the reason that this book was banned was vulgar language, violence, and sexual content. There are some other reasons, but those are the main ones. The biggest one being the inappropriate language that was used, especially some R-rated words that parents wanted to protect their kids from. But I would say these reasons aren't valid. I don't think this book should have been banned for these reasons, especially the vulgar language, because this is told from the perspective of a 16-year-old boy, so it'd be much less authentic if they didn't have that in there. I mean, it makes sense that he would use these swear words, and it's even more relatable to teens. It makes it more authentic, and we wouldn't be as intrigued to read this without it. Same goes for the violence and sexual content. I think that we wouldn't get to know the character as much without these scenes. They weren't too big of a deal. The violence wasn't gruesome or anything. They were honestly small things, and I don't think it was really necessary to ban the book because of these moments.
So the book I read was In Cold Blood by Truman Capote. He was born in New Orleans, September 30th, 1924, and passed away August 25th, 1984. He's mostly known for writing In Cold Blood, but one of his more famous writing was Breakfast at Tiffany's. One fun fact about him is he was friends with Harper Lee, who also helped him write the story In Cold Blood. So the book In Cold Blood is a nonfiction book, and it's about the murders of 4 family members of the Coulter family in Holcomb, Kansas. It was published in 1966, but it was based off the murders in 1959. During that time, it was a time of rebellion and trying to figure out who you are, and it was also in the middle of the Vietnam War, which goes more onto why it was banned. How it connects with the theme is because in the book it discusses where identity comes from, whether it's like an innate behavior, if it's upbringing, if it's a choice of who you are and of what you do. The book was banned for multiple reasons. One of the reasons was sexual content. I do understand why it was banned for that part, and it should be censored, but it is talking about when a main character molested young girls, and without it, I believe the book couldn't be without it because it shows why this character did the killings because of what his past was like and what he has done, which really brought him up to this moment. Another part was the vulgar content. It was very excessive in the book, and I do believe that it could be censored and done without in the book. But one of the main reasons why it was banned because of the violence and the gruesomeness of it, and I think that's a very unjustified reason for it being banned because it excludes the realness of the crime because it is a true crime, and I believe people should see every type of detail in it to really understand the extent of it.
My book was The Invisible Man by H.G. Wells. The Invisible Man is about a scientist who goes and discovers a way to make himself invisible. And he does all these great things for the town that he lives in, but the town does not like it because it cannot see who he is. H.G. Wells was born in 1972, September 1st, and died in August 12th of 1916. He didn't grow up very rich and successful as like other authors. He was scraping by, but once he finally hit 18, he got a scholarship for biology to go to a major university, and that's how he made his money, or didn't make his money, but got his money and then made his book with that spark intended. The reason The Invisible Man got banned was because it didn't teach other readers. It was more of a fun book because this was the first book of science fiction. It wasn't like other literature where it just taught you things that you had to study for, and that's why I got banned.
Okay, so I read A Lesson Before Dying, which is by Ernest J. Gaines, a man who was born on January 15th, 1933. He was a black man living in Oscar, Louisiana at a time of segregation, so he was unfortunately not able to get as fair of an education. Thankfully, when he was 15, he moved to San Francisco and actually was able to attend a university, which is where he learned to love reading and love writing. His book, A Lesson Before Dying, was actually published in 1993, so it's one of his more recent books. Yet it was set in 1940s in a made-up town in Louisiana, kind of similar to how he grew up, actually. And this book deals with a black man named Jefferson who was convicted of a murder of a white man and was sentenced to death. The reason that he came up with this idea was because he was living in San Francisco, and every time he would hear about someone being sentenced to death and someone dying by electric chair or he wouldn't be able to write that day. So he thought he could maybe make a story out of this, and he dealt with, he wanted to focus also on the racial injustice. He wanted to focus on racial injustice as well, since this is something that was. He doesn't know what. Just gonna wait for this.
You're just shouting at everybody.
Oh, not everybody knows. Good job, Vinny. This is. He also wanted to focus on racial injustice, since that's something that was going on at that time, as it is still today. So the theme of this book goes along with ours, identity and coming of age. Basically, this deals with the identity of Jefferson and Grant Wiggins, the teacher that was teaching teaching Jefferson, the man who was about to be that was sentenced to death, about how he can still view himself as a man, because while in the sentencing, he was called a hog, which made him truly believe that he was an animal. And so Grant Wiggins, the teacher, was trying to help him overcome that. And this relates to The Catcher in the Rye, because in The Catcher in the Rye, Holden Caulfield also goes through changes, and you can see him grow as a person just like Jefferson and also Grant Wiggins does. The only difference is that Holden goes through changes, more coming of age, going from boy to man, but Jefferson and Grant Wiggins change more, their views of themselves change and their identity changes.
Okay, so. Oh, you were finished?
No. Sorry. The book was banned because of violent sexual content and inappropriate language. The biggest one being the inappropriate language and the use of the N-word in this book. The only thing I would say about this is that I don't think it should have been banned for those reasons, since this was set in the 1940s. This is, it's more authentic and it's historically accurate, and without it, it would take away from the book. I would say that the sexual content in the book probably wasn't needed. It wasn't, but it doesn't have to be banned over it. It just wasn't exactly necessary, and if it was taken away, it wouldn't take anything away from the storyline. But the violence is necessary, since it describes the situation that Jefferson was in when he was wrongfully accused of murdering a man. And without that, we wouldn't know about the situation.
So between all the contemporary books and the King of Peace, we chose King of Peace if it were to be taught in school, just because it was narrated by a 16-year-old, and it is very relatable. His point of view is so similar to ours, it would really intrigue us, and he has some life lessons on finding out who he is and coming of age that we can really learn and take away from this book.
So obviously, since this is a banned book, there are some sensitive topics, and the way that teachers can deal with these is pretty simple, actually. The main thing being the language, how to deal with that, since that is so commonly used throughout the book. I think since we all know what this language is, we all go to high school, so we all hear it. I mean, it's pretty obvious that we're not shielded from that. It's not anything that they really have to be too worried about, but if they are, they don't have to say that. They're obviously not going to say that word in class. They can make sure that their students don't say those words in class. And the main reason for the language, I think they should focus more on why he uses it and not what he's saying. Also, with the sexual content and the vulgar and the violence, like I said before, it's really small, so they don't need to. It's really not a big deal, and they probably don't need to really focus on that too much, since it's not their minor thing that happened.
in the end of all this, the point we're trying to make across is that vanity books shouldn't really be, a thing. It should be more. Books should be used to more of teaching people and what to go and what's right and wrong. As for Holden, he didn't really have the teaching moments in the book, and teachers can use this to translate to our high school students what is right and how to do better than what Holden did throughout his life. And that's
Sorry if you can't hear that.
I think